So what we're going to try to communicate in the next hour or so is what is physician entrepreneurship anyway, and what are the different types? What are the barriers to international physician entrepreneurship? And basically, if you're interested in something like this, how do you get your ideas to patients or other stakeholders? It's encouraging to see that of the people on this webinar, roughly 40%, as I heard it, had communicated that they answered yes to the question, have you been involved in entrepreneurship in the past? And that's encouraging, and hopefully you can share your ideas or your successes or failures as we go through this. I think the first thing that we need to do is to understand what the definition of entrepreneurship really is. Because if you ask 100 people, that you'll get 100 different answers in terms of what they think it is. In my view, the misperception is that when it comes to healthcare entrepreneurship, the objective is to create a company. But in fact, that's a fairly limited view of what I think entrepreneurship is all about. And hopefully I'll explain some of that in the next couple of slides. My definition of entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity under what are called VUCA, or volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous conditions. The term VUCA was a US Department of Defense term that actually was used during war planning and war planning, strategic planning exercises. And it reflects the rapidly changing environment that happens on a battlefield, and therefore the challenges that are confronting decision makers and leaders on the field. Well, that term has been morphed into business, and because of the international complexity of what's going on, there's the same sort of uncertain, volatile, complex, ambiguous conditions in the business world. So you have to be able to navigate that environment. Now, more specifically, the goal of entrepreneurship, in my view, is to create user or stakeholder defined value rather than just creating a company. Creating a company or deploying a venture is one of many ways to do this. And it's done through the deployment of innovation, and that gets to what is innovation. And finally, you have to make money doing this. If you don't make money doing this, obviously you go out of business. And so therefore you have to use a business model that I refer to as VAST, V-A-S-T, which is valid, automatic, scalable, and time sensitive. Now, value, so to go through sort of a little bit more detail in some of these definitions, the goal is to create user or stakeholder value. And in healthcare, and I call it sick care because in most countries, most of the money is spent taking care of sick people, including the United States. We spend $3.8 trillion, that's with a T, trillion dollars on healthcare in the United States. And we have 325 million people. So you can do the math. It's a lot of money. The outcomes aren't all that great. So we're trying to figure out, just like every other country, how do we make this better? Well, the idea really is to create value. And value, in my definition, is the difference between stakeholder-defined perceived benefits minus the costs. And we all make this cost-benefit evaluation whenever we buy something or do something or choose to spend our time in a certain way. So what you're really trying to do is to create value, which simplistically put is quality per unit price. You can do that by creating a company, but there are other ways of doing it, which we'll discuss. The deployment of innovation is key, and innovation basically has a qualitative and a quantitative component, in my view. And my definition of innovation is something that is new or something that is old done in a new way, but more importantly, delivers multiples of stakeholder defined value. And in the case of sick care, it typically has to be somewhere around 5 times to 10 times the competitive offering or the status quo. So you really have to make something at least 5 or 10 times better than what presently exists. And the notion that there is no competition is just a myth. You may not know that there is competition, but generally there is. Someone is trying to do exactly the same thing you're doing, maybe in a different way. And even if they're not, the status quo is the competition. So people are doing what they're doing without having any other market or blue ocean options, but that's the space you're trying to fill in that circumstance. And then finally, by using this business model or business model canvas, the basic idea is that the underlying assumptions of your business have to be validated, and the model has to be such that it pretty much grows on its own, that it's scalable. And by time sensitive, I mean you only have a certain amount of time to do this. And because you're running out of money, you're running out of resources, you're running out of enthusiasm, you're running out of people who are persistently interested in helping you. So you have to make this happen within a reasonable period of time. And the reality is that doing this at a scalable level is very difficult, and in most instances will fail. And if you look at sort of the numbers, for example, the number of companies, now this is not just for healthcare, but this is for all companies that are startups, will achieve $100 million in annual recurrent revenue in 5 years. And the number of companies that do that is 0.04%. So it's extremely unlikely that you're going to be successful. And each country has different challenges and opportunities. One of the questions that's been asked, and thank you for asking it, is, are these principles common to low and middle income countries? Yes. This applies to wherever you happen to be, whether it's a country with an underdeveloped country with a large poor population, or a large rural population, or a large underserved population, or a more well-developed country with a very high gross domestic product. But the principles, now the way you accomplish this is of course very different if you are in, for example, now, and this applies to the United States as well as India or any other place you happen to be viewing from, because there are many, many underserved populations in the United States. There's enormous wealth disparity, just like a lot of other countries. There's a big digital divide. Lots of folks in the United States do not have access to broadband or internet. There's large parts of the United States which are rural communities that are underserved, that are understaffed, that have small rural hospitals. So a lot of the landscape of this conversation applies to the United States or any other place in the world. Of course, the cultures are different.